Hello everyone, I'm Priyadashni Mara, faculty at the Department of Buddhist Studies, University of Delhi. Today I'm going to discuss with you module number 22, and this module belongs to paper number 11 of Philosophy of Buddhism. This module is entitled as Doctrine of kilsta mano-vijnana. It can also be said mano-vijnana, but here we would be using the full term which states kilsta mano-vijnana. So let us see what vijnana is or what kilsta mano-vijnana means. If we look at this word vijnana, it is known as vijnana or vigyan and is widely named in Buddhism and rendered in English as consciousness or knowing or even as awareness. These word does not fit in word when we say vinyan. The Sanskrit word arises from the root gya, which means to know. The prefix vi define the separation or division. It acts as the awareness and cognizance to notice or to observe. Two words that are also commonly translated are the mind as chit and manas. Sometimes it is denoted by other name called as heart-mind because it is a state of mind which represents the feeling more than the thoughts. So the role of mind is to take in intellect and give out a judgment. Even when we look at it in the modern context, translator render all these words by mind or awareness. A lot of meaning gets lost and makes the word meaningless. However, when we look at any sort of translation for that matter, we see that the kind of knowledge or essence that we wanted to impart by using that word, now that it has been translated and a lot of other synonyms are being used for that particular translation, we see that the word does not really mean the same. Vijnana is also one skandha. Skandha means or points out to the 5 aggregates, which is the collection of components that make an individual. Now, what are these 5 aggregates? If you remember, we've been studying about Panch Upadana Skandha or the 5 aggregates of form, feeling, perception, discrimination, consciousness. Therefore, Vijnana Skandha usually is translated by various scholars into or as consciousness or awareness. Vijnana is one of the 6 faculties which is called mind, which help in corresponding the phenomena as its object. For example, the mental consciousness has the mind which acts as basis and idea or thought of object. Aggregate of consciousness is intersection of organ and object. It is therefore the pure awareness. Vijnana is also third of the 12 links of dependent origination. You can say that Vijnana, when we look at dependent origination, Vijnana also stands as the third link of dependent origination. Without this 12 link, the dependent origination becomes meaningless because these are the 12 links that point out to the arising of the causal phenomena in a dependent way. These 12 links are chain of cause and effect relationship. So this is Vijnana in general terms. Now when we look at this Vijnana or consciousness, how according to Yogacar it is being defined. This school emphasizes that Vijnana is real, but object of awareness are unreal. So when it comes to the object and subject relationship, we see that according to the Yogacara school, Vijnana is real, but the object that lies external to this Vijnana is unreal. So if you remember, then we have already talked, or in our future modules, we would be talking about the refutation of external objects by Yogacara Buddhists. When we talk about Yogacara school, we need to remember one thing always. It is that they believe or they accept only the mental, and for them non-mental is unreal. And when we talk about the Madhyamik school, which is its counterpart, we see that Madhyamik denies the reality of either mental or non-mental. So for Yogacara, it is mental which is real, and they uphold the mind to be real in order to make any thinking possible. So they think the external objects are creation of consciousness. Yogacara is primarily concerned with the nature of consciousness and nature of experience. It merely deals with the idealism. The central problem in Yogacara philosophy is logical synthesis of idealism. So the central problem when we talk about Yogacara philosophy, it is the logical synthesis of idealism and absolutism. Yogacara, however, contend that subjectivity through the source of unreality is real. The main target is to reach the ground of all phenomena. According to Yogacara, object is not appearing and cannot be service to knowledge. It is therefore unreal. Consciousness is the sole reality and object are just modes of consciousness. When we talk about consciousness and we talk about the object and the consciousness arising, we see that the mind plays function in constructing this consciousness of reality. That is unreal. When we talk about the things that lying outside are to be unreal, then how do we talk about those things? We see that it is consciousness or Vijnana that leads to the construction or to the mental construction of those things which lie outside or beyond the mind. Even the body or anything is termed by Yogacharans as unreal. It is only mind which builds up these conceptual constructions in order to talk about things that lie outside it. So this is how Yogacharan are known as Yogacara idealists. When we talk about kilsta mano-vijnana, we term it to be defiled mind or defiled consciousness. In Vigyapti Matrita Siddhi, there is one about the class of consciousness in which this is one of the class of consciousness. Manas-vijnana, which means mind knowledge, and compared to mantra gyan is the seventh of the 8 consciousness as described in Yogacara. So Yogacara school gives out 8 kinds of consciousness. We have eye consciousness, ear consciousness, tongue consciousness, nose consciousness, body consciousness. Then we have the mind. Then we have kilsta mano-vijnana, and the 8th one is alya vijnana. So these all together these 8 types of consciousness bring about any conceptual construction and bring about a clearer understanding or helps in verbal communication. When we look at consciousness as described in Yogacara and in Zen Buddhism, it is the higher intuitive consciousness that on the one hand localizes experience through thinking and on the other hand universalizes experience through intuitive perception of the universal mind, and that is Alya Vinyan. Just listen to it carefully when we talk about consciousness, which is described in Yogacara and in Zen Buddhism. It says the higher intuitive consciousness that on the one hand localizes experience through thinking and on the other hand universalizes experience through intuitive perception of the universal mind of Alya Vinyan. Manas Vinyan, also known as Klisht Manas Vinyan or Klisht mano-vijnana, is not to be confused with mano-vijnana, which is the sixth consciousness. So on one hand we have Klisht Manas Vinyan and on the other hand we have mano-vijnana. One of the primary functions of Manas Vinyan is to perceive the subjective position of the storehouse consciousness, which we term to be Alya Vinyan, and further erroneously regard it as one's own ego, thereby creating ego attachment. So this consciousness has been described in different ways of description. The nature of Manas Vinyan is to focus on thought. There is a slight difference between the thought of this seventh consciousness, which is Manas Vinyan, and the sixth consciousness based on thought of cognition, which can easily be vivid in this class of consciousness. It is merely not consciousness which can be controlled. Manas Vinyan is also called to be the mind of a realm that gives boost to contradiction of conscious decisions and to incessant self-love. When we talk about Manas Vinyan, we see that it is called to be mind of a realm that gives boost to contradiction of conscious decisions and to incessant self-love. Manas Vinyan can be illustrated as the consciousness which sees the limits of human variations from within the consciousness of human level. So do you understand the difference between Manas Vinyan and mano-vijnana? When we talk about Manas Vinyan, it is the consciousness which sees the limits of human variation from within consciousness of human level. Manas Vinyan consciousness is also explained as the place where good and evil are eternally arisen. It is the consciousness which is categorized as in connecting realm between mano consciousness and Alya Vinyan. So it lies at the realm or at the intersection where it makes a contact between mano consciousness or mano-vijnana and Alya Vinyan. Manas Vinyan, being the seventh consciousness, is the basis of human experience and the human nature, which strongly continues and changes and serves as the ground for the sixth consciousness of cognition. Thus, Vinyan is the faculty of distinguishing or judging. When we talk about Vinyan, we say that it is the faculty of distinguishing or judging. When an object is presented before the eyes, it is perceived and judged as a red apple or a piece of white linen. The faculty of doing this is called eye Vinyan or eye consciousness. In the same way, there is ear Vinyan for sound, nose Vinyan or nose consciousness for odor, tongue Vinyan or tongue consciousness for taste, body Vinyan or feeling consciousness for touch, and thought Vinyan and that is mano-vijnana. 4 ideas. Altogether, these 6 forms of vijnana are there for judging the various aspects of world, external or internal. Hence, these 6 are vijnanas. Mano-vijnana is the most important of these 6. And why is it important? Because it is directly concerned to inner faculty, which is known as manas. Manas roughly corresponds to mind as an organ of thought in developing the maturity of thinking. But in fact, it is more than that, for it is also a strong power of binding itself to the result of thinking. So when we talk about manas, we say that it corresponds to mind as an organ of thought and is used or helpful in developing the maturity of thinking. But we see that along with this, it is also a strong power of binding itself to the result of thinking. And this latter part may even be considered subordinate to power of attachment. When we talk about the latter part of manas or the latter function of manas, we see that it can also be considered subordinate to this power of attachment. So here, therefore, when we look at the functioning of this manas, we see that it wills first. Then the power to discriminate or to judge is defined. Then to judge is to categorize, and this categorization ends with viewing existence dualistically. Hence, manas is attachment to dualistic interpretation of existence. Now here, willing and thinking are the great woven into a certain texture of manas. The transitional function is served by manas. It makes possible emergency of the object consciousness out of alya vijnana, and at the same time maintains the distinction between the two. So therefore, it is said to be established or to bring about an establishment which is that of separation, and at the same time to meditate the relation between the terms. Manas is also called because the process of intellectual properties is always going or performing along with manas. This content of alya is indeterminate objectivity. It is invariably referred to as defiled or klishta because it is a combination of particular class of mental cases, and that is chit. Therefore, manas functions and it must be accompanied by 4 other factors. So when we look at the functioning of manas, we see that there are 4 other factors that are playing its role. And these are: first, the false notion of an ego; second, ignorance about ego; third, elation of ego; and fourth, attached to it. So these are the 4 factors that work along with manas. The imposition of false notion of an ego upon the constituent of an individual is what is there, and it is present. In reality, there is no I, but only the momentariness of skandha. When we talk about the reality, we see that there is nothing, there is no notion of I, but only momentariness of skandha. To draw this ego consciousness, it indicates that the process of categorization of objective has started. By certain meditation and practices, this process of intellect can be stopped. In the state arhat who has destroyed all defilements without any residue, and in his state the manas does not exist, but it again arises out of alya. Alya itself ceases there, and hence the function of manas is stopped. Manas basically said to be absent in no less than 5 states. This again is parallel existing between concept of alya and sakshi. In the nirvikalp samadhi, the empirical subject vanishes but arises again out of sakshi at its termination. When we look at the object of 7th class of consciousness, which is manas, the object is not the sense world, but the ever-flowing stream of becoming or our depth of consciousness. When we talk about the object of the 7th class of consciousness, we see that it is not the sense world. Then if it is not the sense world, it is the ever-flowing stream of becoming or depth of consciousness, which is neither limited by birth and death nor by individual form of appearance. Birth and death are only the doors between one life and another, with the continuous stream of consciousness flowing through them. So when we talk about birth and death, we see that they are only doors between one life and another, and there's a continuous stream of consciousness that is flowing through them, even in the form when there is a birth, and even in the form when there is destruction or death, and vijnana, which is said to be rebirth linking consciousness. This consciousness contained in its surface the causally conditioned states of existence, and also the sum total of all experiences of a beginningless past. To the Vijnanvadins, this is the 8th or the universal consciousness or storehouse consciousness, and it is called Alya Vijnana. The 6th consciousness, which is termed as the intellectual or empirical consciousness, or also as mano-vijnana, it sorts and judges the result of the 5 kinds of sense consciousness, and it is followed by attraction or repulsion and the illusion of our objective world. The 8th, the universal consciousness, is compared to an ocean, which on the surface current and wave forms, while its depth remains motionless, pure and clear. It transcends all limits in its pure, unchanging, undisturbed form by our ego, without any distinction or desire and aversions. Between the universal consciousness and the individual intellectual consciousness is the spiritual consciousness, and that is manas, and this takes part in both sides. The center of balance and reference for these two consciousness is of double characteristic. It is the cause for conception of egohood in the unenlightened individual, a being who mistakes his relative point for the real and permanent center of his personality. It is our intellect, our mental consciousness, or which is termed as mano-vijnana, which conceives our 7th consciousness, which is manas, as our ego. In this state, it is termed the defiled mind, the nature of which consists in an uninterrupted process of creating, the ego creating thoughts and discrimination. On the positive side, the intuitive side of manas, is one with universal consciousness, participating in transcendental intelligence. When manas is directed from universal consciousness towards the individual or self-consciousness, it becomes a source of error. When directed from manas is that which either binds us to the world of the senses or which liberates us from it. It is the principle through which universal consciousness experiences itself and through which it descends into the multiplicity of things and into the differentiation of senses and the sense objects, out of which arises the experience of material world. The process of becoming the progressive limitation of the unlimited. These are the factors that are played by the process of the world and the knower. Liberation, hence, consists in the reversal of this process, in the progressive annihilation of these limitations. It requires a progressive annihilation of these limitations in order for the reversal of process, which further points out to the attainment of enlightenment. Annihilation here does not mean the suppression of sense consciousness, but it points out to a new attitude towards them, consisting in the removal of arbitrary discriminations, attachments and prejudices, that is, the elimination of karmic formations, which create the illusion of samsara, of birth and death. When there is a turning away from the outside world of objects to the inner world of oneness and completeness, we have entered into the stream of liberation. So this turning away from the outside world is necessary, from the outside world of objects to the inner world of oneness and completeness, and that is the stream of liberation. A bridge is shown here which leads from the ordinary world of the sense perception to the realm of timeless knowledge. In the process of enlightenment, the 5 groups of form, feeling, perception, mental formation and consciousness are transformed into the corresponding qualities of enlightenment, and that consciousness is called bodhicitta, or the development of the Buddha nature. Perception and intellectual discrimination are converted into transcendental faculty of inner vision in the practice of meditation. And that is the reason the meditative practices are given a lot of importance when it comes to controlling this mind that describes the outer or external reality. It is the special function of the Dhyani Buddha of infinite light, the wisdom of discriminating clear vision. Clear vision here is not concerned with intellectual analysis, but with intuitive clear vision, which is uninfluenced by any sort of logical or conceptual discriminations. It is a direct state of spiritual awareness. When we destroy the subject and the object in the final experience, that is the experience of emptiness. According to Yogacara, it is the non-dual or the dual nature that leads to emptiness as well as the full form. On the basis of such visions, the ego-bound karma, creating mental formation, is converted into the karma-free activity of a saint, whose life is no more motivated by desire or attachment, but his life is motivated by universal compassion embodied in the figure of a Buddha, and that is the Lord of all accomplishing wisdom. Here, we neither destroy the subject nor the object. We have reached the ultimate freedom and returning to this world for the benefit of all living beings. So the subject and object duality has come to an end, and there's a return in order to help other sentient beings. This is what the idea of kilsta mano-vijnana points out to. When we talk about kilsta mano-vijnana, we see first of all that it is the awareness or conscious state that is the one that is regarded with or being the seventh of the eight consciousnesses as described by Yogacara Buddhism. It is the higher intuitive consciousness that on the one hand localizes experience and on the other hand universalizes experience through intuitive perception of the universal mind, and that is of Alya Vijnana. We talk about the 8 kinds of consciousness prescribed by the Yogacara school. The nature of mano-vijnana is, however, to focus on thought. There is slightly any difference between the thought of the 7th consciousness and mano-vijnana, the 6th consciousness, based on thought of cognition. When we talk about kilsta mano-vijnana, we see that it is the consciousness or the awareness that is present amongst the 8 types of consciousness described by Yogacara school, and it also performs in accordance with Alya Vijnana, which is the storehouse consciousness. These 8 types of consciousness work together in order to define the external things or objects which according to Yogacara are not real. It is only the mind that is real. And this is the kilsta mano-vijnana, the concept of kilsta mano-vijnana according to Yogacara Buddhism. Thank you.